Hello, everyone. This video is going to go over how to find news and how you can start looking for story ideas for the rest of the semester. As a reminder, over the course of the semester, you will be doing 5 different types of news stories. And so I want you to start being able to recognize areas where you can find news, find stories, and start looking for some ideas of what you might do later in the semester. There are 2 basic types of news, and a lot of times I'm going to be giving you a requirement of either doing a hard or soft news story. So I wanted to go over those a little bit. Hard news is what we typically think of when we think of journalism, I think. It's very serious, it's timely, it covers very important topics. The primary purpose of hard news is to inform or educate. A lot of hard news tends to be accidents, crime, disasters, speeches, or big political events, press conferences, politics, health, investigative work. These are things that we would consider hard news. Hard news is also known as spot news, straight news, or if it's happening right now, it's also breaking news. So all of those would be considered hard news stories. Soft news tends to be a little fluffier. It tends to be a little lighter. It's why it's called soft news. These are primarily features or human interest story. The primary goal of soft news is to entertain as well as inform. So a lot of these stories tend to draw on emotions, and that can be a sad soft news story, or it can be a very lighthearted, uplifting news story. Profiles of individual people, or what we call features, tend to fall under the soft news category. This is also where our news value of unusual or bizarre news goes into, as well as those how-to videos that we do. Soft news tends to be a lot less timely. We call these evergreen stories because if something happens throughout the course of the day and maybe we have breaking news, these soft news stories are going to be the first to be eliminated from the initial newscast or news feed because they are evergreen. They can be used at any time. They tend to not be very time sensitive, although that's not always the case. So here you can see the example. Hard news would be a school shooting, where soft news would be, hey, teachers are welcoming back students for the first time, and yay, it's nice and fluffy. But where do you find news? Where can you find these categories of news, and where should you start looking for news ideas? Well, news doesn't just fall in your lap most of the time. As journalists, you have to be willing to look and investigate and really dig through a lot of information to decide what is news. I think one of the best ways to do that is by watching news. I find it surprising that a lot of upcoming journalists, students who want to be professional writers, don't actually watch the news themselves. And this is a really big disadvantage for those students who don't watch news, because when you watch news, you tend to get an idea of the patterns and types of things that become newsworthy. You can also learn a lot about writing news by watching it because you start understanding what different formats look like and how news really works. This is why I'm giving you those current event quizzes each week, because I want to get you addicted to news. But more than that, I think when you watch the news, you can get great ideas on stories that you can do as well. If you're watching a story, let's say on ABC 3340, and it's about statewide effects of coronavirus on, I'm not sure, the elderly population, well, then you could go and localize that statewide story and localize it there in Montevallo. And so by watching news, you kind of get a lot of good ideas on other news that you can pursue as well. Now, in professional journalism, 86% of all news generates with the press release. And this is actually really interesting considering that public relations and advertising tends to be thought of as separate from journalistic ethics, and yet so much of PR controls what we consider newsworthy. And while you will not have press releases sent to you as a student journalist, you can look at press releases from other organizations such as the university or other things to give you ideas on stories that you can pursue. Also in the professional world, we tend to have news feeds that are given to the news organization. This could be anything from AP or Reuters. Maybe you have a CNN news feed if you're working in broadcasting. And these are national or international stories that you can either run as they are given from the news feed, or you can localize them. And those are good sources of ideas as well. This, in your case, you're going to watch the news in order to get a news feed. But in the real world, these will be provided to you as an internal resource. Social media is also an excellent way to find news. As you're scrolling through your feeds or going through your Insta stories, be thinking about things that your social circle is posting that might make for an interesting news story. Also setting up Google alerts for the city of Montevallo or Alabama to see different subjects, topics, and areas that are going on can be helpful as well. Digg, D-I-G-G, is an aggregate topic site that talks about what is most popular on the web for that day. And so it will pull a large amount of data from social media as well as other digital sites to talk about what the most popular conversations happening in the world are. This can be a good way to generate ideas as well. I really encourage you to have networks, personal and online, that kind of become contacts. If you have a friend who maybe is on student council, call them up, ask them what's going on. Develop these contacts across the university and throughout your life to provide story ideas, because your personal and online network tends to be one of the best sources of news and information ideas. When you're a professional journalist, you might even set up a call log. For instance, every day when I was working as a journalist, one of my first tasks would be to call the different police and fire stations to ask if they had anything that happened overnight. And a lot of times we'd get some really good news just by doing that call log. Investigative journalism can be difficult to do when you're just starting out, but I would encourage you guys to start thinking about data journalism. With all of the data that is being shared out in the world, you can easily take a data set and start combing through it to get some story ideas. And we'll be talking about data journalism more specifically in the later half of the semester, but this is also a great way to get story ideas. But perhaps the best thing that you can do is just observe the world around you. As you're going about your daily life, whether you're remote and taking classes online, or whether you're on campus, just continue to observe the world, ask questions. If something interests you and you're asking like, why is this happening? Or what is this about? It's likely that audiences would be doing the same. So being observant, kind of questioning things around you is just a natural characteristic that you need to develop as journalists. And that can be a great way for you to get story ideas as well. So there are other considerations when thinking about what stories you want to pursue. You need to think about what the sources of information are. Every year I have students who are very interested in sports, and especially when I was teaching at UA, people would want to do these great stories on the football team. And yet getting access to Nick Saban is shockingly difficult for an undergraduate student. And so if the source is not available, then that's not going to be a great story idea for you. That kind of goes into access as well, but there are many things that you cannot access. One, since you're not a professional journalist, and two, due to COVID restrictions that are going to make some stories more difficult than others. So make sure that you have access to whatever story you're trying to pursue. You also need to consider the format. Throughout the semester, we're going to be doing print stories, digital, social media, as well as radio and television stories. So you need to be thinking, what do you have access to? Will you be able to get video? Will you be able to get audio? Can you create graphics for this story? If the answers are no, then that's not going to be great for an audiovisual format. It could be okay for a print or digital piece, but be thinking about different ways of how you can use the format of the journalism to your advantage. Also be considering your turnaround and deadlines. Deadlines are really important in journalism, and if you miss a deadline, you can easily be fired for missing slot, and it makes a large impact for your entire news organization when you miss a deadline. So don't do a story that is going to take you weeks and months to conduct if your deadline is next week. Also be thinking about the finances. How much money would it cost you to do that? For instance, if you were wanting to cover an away game, do you have the finances to get to the location of the away game? Things of that nature. And then, of course, I always want to encourage you to be safe. And safety comes in all different types of forms. This is a photo from the protests that were happening around George Floyd's death. And this reporter was actually being shot at by some of the officers who were covering the protest because she was crossing the boundary lines of where she was supposed to be. She was not in a safe location. Now, I'm not going to argue whether the police officer was correct in shooting the journalist with the tear gas, but it is important that you follow all guidelines and rules when it comes to your safety. Because even though you're a journalist, if you are not following the law, you will still face legal repercussions. In addition, I want to pay special attention to the fact that we are in COVID and we need to follow all social distancing guidelines and masking ordinances when doing our stories. So if you have a story that you cannot safely do within 6 feet away from someone and wearing a mask, then it's not a story worth pursuing. And as we go throughout the semester, I'll talk to you about some ways that we can get around that for interviews and other things in order to keep you safe. So these are additional considerations when thinking about your story ideas. So over the next few weeks, I want you to find ideas to pitch. Your pitch assignment is actually not due until the beginning of October, but I want you to start thinking about it now, because if you just wait until the day before the assignment's due, it's going to be difficult to find really good story ideas. So start developing this news habit now of thinking about stories that you could actually do throughout the semester. Finally, make sure you read chapter 3 so that you're ready for lectures on Monday. That's going to end week 1's module for MC200. I'm so thankful for you guys sticking with me through this online format. I know it can be very challenging and very difficult. In addition, I front load all of my classes, so you're getting a lot of work in these first few weeks, and I know that it can feel overwhelming. Please don't stress out about the number of assignments or the number of videos. You are in a great place to do all of this material, and I'm going to be right here with you, making sure that you're doing your best. But know that it will lighten up as the semester continues and as we get away from some of the AP style assignments. Those take up a lot of time, I recognize that, but it's important to build that foundation now so that when we go and write our journalism pieces, you are better prepared as writers. So thank you guys so much. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm really looking forward to working with you guys throughout the semester. Have a great weekend.